by facts and driven by truth. Broadcasting live from beautiful British Columbia, it's RoadKill Radio.
Hi everybody, I'm Kari Simpson, and this is RoadKill Radio News. And joining me, as always,
Ron Gray.
And we have a very special show, a show of historical significance today, Ron. Joining us is Marc Lemire, a name that will become synonymous with freedom of speech and freedom of Canadians.
And the defeat of Section 13.
All throughout Canada. Marc, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks so much for having me on today.
Now, there's significant events that we have to talk about, but let's, for those of our audience that are just sort of new to the RoadKill Radio universe here, you've been on our show before, we've talked about this issue before, but this involves a very important issue here in Canada, and that was a section within the Canadian Human Rights Code which basically took away one of our freedoms, the freedom of speech. And you found yourself at the center of this controversy by an activist who regularly abused and used the sympathetic ear of the Canadian Human Rights Commission to basically harass Canadians who were saying things that he didn't like. This individual, of course, was named Richard Warman. Marc, go back to 2003, because is that when all of this started?
Yes, back in 2003, Richard Warman filed a complaint against me under Section 13 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. This was part of sort of a plan. He was filing complaints against all sorts of people with his current employer at the time, the Canadian Human Rights Commission. He was actually working for them during the day, and at nighttime he would file complaints against people.
Okay.
So kicked off this huge 10-year process.
Now, what was it back in 2003 that made you the target of Richard Warman's wrath?
Well, I had a message board where people could make comments on various topics of the day, and Warman was lurking around my message board for upwards of a year, and finally came across some information that he decided to file a Section 13 complaint against. And he filed it sometime in late 2003, and I got notification of it early 2004. By this time, unrelated to the human rights complaint, I had already taken the message board down. So we've actually fought for 9 years over a message board that didn't even exist at the time I received the complaint.
Okay, now I want to be very clear about this, because this is one of the challenges we have here at RoadKill Radio. We tend to get into subject matters that are perhaps not politically correct. As a matter of fact, we have what we call a declaimer, saying if you're politically correct, we guarantee we will offend you. In Canada, there seems to have been this adopted practice, because I don't think it's lawful, of conditioning people that you have to have certain views on certain subject matters, and you're only allowed to discuss certain subject matters that, in a way that don't offend anybody's sensibilities. And God forbid if you speak the truth on certain issues, because you might hurt somebody's feelings. So we're constantly having to watch what goes on. I have found that people that don't agree with us use very deceptive tactics. They'll try to post comments that we know are written by people who are just trying to make people that would perhaps agree with us look like idiots or hateful, harmful people. You were running a website, and I'm sure you encountered this same kind of practice.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, actually, in the course of my hearing, it was revealed that Richard Warman used aliases on my account, on my message board, to make posts. That the Canadian Human Rights Commission investigators used anonymous accounts. I mean, that's the main problem with message boards, particularly in Canada. I mean, Section 13 is basically an absolute slam dunk. All they have to do is simply make a complaint against you, and back then you had absolutely no chance of winning. There's a 100% conviction rate. So what they would do, and we saw this on many other websites, and most of this came out, under oath testimony during my case, the Canadian Human Rights Commission investigators and others went on message boards and other websites, posted provocative comments, and then sat back and waited. Basically it was a self-fulfilling
that more like entrapment?
And then try to entrap the message board owners.
Yeah. Okay, so
This extends past just human rights legislation. I mean, we have seen this tactic used in lawfare. We have seen this tactic used in other things. Like there's a recent case in Ottawa involving some guy named Baglow who sued Free Dominion over comments. He used an alias to go on there and post his own name and stuff like that, saying, "Oh, we're going to sue you." He called himself Miss Mew. So, I mean, this is a common tactic of people that want to censor others to go on there and incite and try to do other comments on these websites to entrap the people that are involved. And with horrible laws like Section 13, you had no chance. All it took was a stamp for Richard Warman to send a letter into his buddies at the Canadian Rights Commission, and that kicked off a legal process that isn't even done yet. It's been 9 years.
Well, and Mark Stein, in his recent article in Maclean's magazine, said, for Warman, there was little risk. You, that is the taxpayer, paid his costs, and the dice were loaded. And then he says, until the tenacious Marc Lemire won his landmark victory in 2009, Section 13 prosecutions had a 3-decade, 100% conviction rate that even the Soviets might envy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was the greatest thing ever set up for people that want to censor others. Because under no circumstances would a person who laid a complaint be forced to put out any money. Even if I won, which I did, no money was sent back to me for winning. Every one of the motions that I won in the intervening components while during the tribunal never got cost for anything. So say take a person like Richard Warman, for instance, all he has to do is put a stamp on a complaint. That's it. He's at no risk of losing money. He's at no risk of anything. He didn't even show up for most of my hearing. So, I mean, you don't even have to show up for the. All you do is file a complaint. The government or the Canadian Rights Commission takes it over, pays every cent of the legal bill for their side, and as a respondent, you're stuck paying everything. If you lose your lawyer fees, and on top of it, you could be fined up to $30,000, have a lifetime gag order put against you. So, I mean, it's completely and utterly risk-free for those that wish to silence others.
And, Mark, I want to also say that Canadians are paying for this because the Canadian Human Rights Commissions are funded with our tax dollars. So we are funding the abuse of our fellow citizens with unlawful provisions. And I want to get to those unlawful provisions because, well, I want to do two things here, Mark. Because, number one, I'm intrigued. There seems to be us Canadians who don't fear somebody saying something bizarre, outrageous, offensive. We will use that to declare that this individual is probably, misguided, or we don't agree with them. We don't fear public debate. We like good discussion. We like a verbal war, if you will, on certain occasions. We don't have to agree with everybody in what they say. And certainly I hope the RoadKill Radio universe provides that opportunity. When we take people to task, we invite them on the show to prove us wrong or to state their case. They don't usually show up, but so there's two things. First of all, your site says provocative things that people won't agree with, but you probably are doing a service in Canada because you're illuminating your views, what you think people should be decided. You're initiating debate, which is a healthy thing for a society. But there's something that intrigues me more on this, because I think for the old guard Canadians, we enjoy that. But these youngins that are being raised in the public indoctrination system are being trained in conformity. So what made you not succumb to the oppression that is a designed result? That's what they want. You were supposed to get scared and go away and pay your fine and be a good little boy, but you fought back. You actually not only challenged what Warman was doing, you charged the constitutionality of what was going on in the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and you launched a constitutional challenge to this.
And won the constitutional challenge. But, what they tried to do, at the end of the day, the Human Rights Commission can assess you $30,000 in fines. But the real mischievous part of what they do is issue a lifetime, permanent not 2, 3 years, not 4, for your entire life, a gag order that you cannot talk about these certain vague topics that brought you to the tribunal in the first place. And in my case, they alleged, like 400 hate messages that I allegedly had something to do with online. And none of them were written by me, but they had people were posting others. And if you read the tribunal decision, I was found not liable on every single one, except for one.
But this is
this is the point, the cease and desist order. Because what can happen once you get hit with a cease and desist order is exactly what's happening to people like Kari Tremaine. What they do then is use the power of the criminal law, take you, charge you now criminally for contempt of court, and then you could face up to 5 years in jail. And that's really the end game of it. The end game is to silence you, to harass you, and not only that, to do it for the rest of your life.
Tell me something, Marc Lemire. We're talking to Marc Lemire, a great champion of freedom here in Canada, won a constitutional challenge against the Canadian Human Rights Commission, and is probably one of the leading forces in why Parliament has recently debated this bill. And I want to get to that because there was a private member's bill entered in by MP Starnsmith, I think, to eliminate these sections. But Marc, I want to be very clear on 2 points here. Number one, how much has all this cost you personally?
Well over 100,000.
Okay, and that's not including your time. That's just dollars, I would imagine.
It's not including all my time.
Okay.
And the stress that it put on my life and my family.
Now, you also had the benefit of a really good lawyer here who I would assume became very involved from an ethical point of view, not just as a lawyer. She went above and beyond the call of duty to represent you.
Well, my lawyer is Barbara Kalashka, and she is one of the experts on Section 13. She handled some cases prior to mine. She is probably the most knowledgeable person in all of Canada on Section 13 and on the Canadian Human Rights Commission and their processes. She had filed access requests with them, years before any of this, and she is, one heck of a great fighter. I mean, it's really thanks to her that so much of this information was able to be brought out because, the Canadian Human Rights Commission and the Attorney General of Canada tried to fight tooth and nail not to have any of this information. Information like the Canadian Human Rights Commission spying online on people, creating fake accounts on various websites to entrap people.
Have there been any charges on those fronts, though, Marc?
They actually claim national security to not reveal that information. They used a very unusual part of the criminal code called Section 37, which is only used in, mafia hearings and Al-Qaeda hearings to prohibit the disclosure of information. I mean, that's how fanatical they were to hide what they were doing. And it's really thanks to people like Barbara who took this to federal court, beat them at federal court, went back to the tribunal and beat them there too. I mean, it's really thanks to her that this law has become, almost repealed now.
Are you telling me that the Attorney General of Canada, Crown, went along with this bizarre notion of that this is a national security issue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were at the hearing, we were asking about these names that the Canadian Human Rights Commission employees use online, because we know of at least 2 or 3 names that they use. So we're asking about this, and they invoked Section 37, which prohibits any disclosure of material that is injurious to the national security of Canada. I mean, this is nutty stuff. This is craziness. And actually, it was out of those Section 37 invocations that they even tried to ban me from my own hearing. I mean, this is craziness. And this is where McLean's got involved in my case, sent in a heavyweight lawyer and made a motion to the tribunal to open it to the public. But this is how crazy and fanatical the Human Rights Commission was to keep their censorship powers.
Marc, do you think that that this would have ever gained enough attention to move someone like Brian Storthus to try to successfully repeal Section 13, if they had not been stupid enough to take on the media, when they went after Mark Stein and McLean's and
it would have been a much harder battle, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, if you still look at the fundamentals of what Section 13 is. It's not supposed to punish people. It's supposed to be a piece of remedial legislation. So, like, take my case, for instance. All the alleged messages were down long before I received the complaint. So there's nothing to remediate. It's already all gone.
Yeah.
But they still continue. Because what they really want to do is prosecute people.
Yes.
And harass them through years and fine them. This is the end game of what they want to do, but that's not remedial.
No.
You know, and so even the fundamentals of Section 13 fail too. But the greatest mistake or the best benefit for those of us who believe in freedom of speech was when they went after the media. Because when they went after McLean, Ezra Levant, and others, you know, reporters started looking around for information on the Canadian Human Rights Commission. And of course, I had a huge resource of information on them, really critical information on them.
I like what Kathy Shadle said. You know, what Kathy Shadle said to the Human Rights Commission is, "You're too stupid to tell me what to think."
Yeah, she's absolutely right. I mean, if you look at some of these people, I mean, one of them's a failed cop who was corrupt, and she's now going to investigate. The guy who was the investigator on my case, I mean, believe it or not, I mean, he was, you know, blind, couldn't see, wasn't able to log on the computer, had to have other people do it, and this guy was the biggest user of anonymous accounts on the internet to try to trap people. I mean, it really is amazing.
Yeah. You know, you couldn't write a better book, could you, Mark? You know, I mean, if you wanted to write a really entertaining piece of fiction, this is the perfect script.
The cop who got kicked off the Carleton Place Police Force because she was having an affair with someone who was coming to trial was the investigator for the Canadian Human Rights Commission on my case. And Ezra Levant wrote of that she's not moral enough to be a cop in Carleton Place, Ontario, but she's just right.
She's corrupt enough to be on the Canadian Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark.
That shows the utter rot right from the inside of the Human Rights Commission. You know, where they're hiring these corrupt police. And this is why, when it was revealed everything that they were doing, they didn't see any problem with it. They don't see any problem with entrapping people. They don't see any problem with, you know, posting an avalanche of hate material on the internet. And these are the people that supposedly are sent to stop hate on the internet. It's a completely bizarre world over the Human Rights Commission.
But then remember, freedom of speech is an American concept, according to the investigator. Is that not true?
Yeah, that's exactly what he said during cross-examination in my case. And, you know, that type of attitude is not unusual there. It's the norm there.
That's not an attitude. That's ignorance. Okay, Mark, let's talk a little bit about the private members bill that has now made its way through Parliament. It passed with a majority. MP Brian Storseth has maneuvered this brilliantly because it's not often a private member's bill makes progress. What is the status of that bill and what is its intent?
Well, the intent of the bill is to repeal Section 13 and parts of Section 54 of the Canadian Human Rights Act. So Section 13 is the section that they use to silence people under the Human Rights Act. Section 54 is where they assess fines against you. So this is the $10,000 to $30,000 fine. So it has now passed the House of Commons. So it received basically the support of the Conservatives, and also one Liberal, Scott Sims from Newfoundland, voted for it also.
Well, good for him.
It's now passed all the House of Commons. It's passed third reading, and it's on to the Senate. Currently, it's at the second reading in the Senate. So I think it was last Wednesday, Senator Finley rose in the Senate to talk about this bill. He's the person moving the bill in the Senate. And he delivered a very great, an excellent speech on what's wrong with Section 13, the corruption of the Canadian Human Rights Commission and others, former employees, and it was a great speech. I posted a copy of his speech on my website, and you can go and get it at stopsection13.com. So right now it's at second reading. The Senate sometimes puts sort of the end part of second and third reading together in one. So it's possible, but most likely won't be till the fall, till it actually is passed in the Senate and receives royal assent. And then there's sort of an odd thing with the bill. There's a 1-year implementation period, which I'm not sure why Storrs put that in, but it causes a bit of problem for my case, because my case is currently under appeal. The Canadian Human Rights Commission appealed
Oh, really?
the ruling of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal. So the tribunal found that Section 13 was utterly unconstitutional and against my freedom of speech rights. So the Canadian Human Rights Commission has appealed that to the federal court.
Okay, and this is always what intrigued me. Actually, we've changed the structure of our tribunal here in British Columbia. There's no longer a separate entity between commission and tribunal. But let me get this straight, not only for my sake, but that for our audience. The initial complaint that was made against you by Warwin went to the Human Rights Commission.
Yeah.
And then the commission refers it to tribunal. Is that how it worked?
Yes, the commission refers it to the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal.
Okay, so in essence, they're a similar body. They work in concert with each other. Is that right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, so
they're allegedly independent, but they seem to rubber stamp everything that Human Rights Commission does.
Well, I think that the history and the pattern would demonstrate that as an accurate statement. Now, so we went up to the BC Human Rights Tribunal, and after all the fanfare, because by now in 2000, when did they come down with it? In 2009 that they ruled that it was unconstitutional?
Yeah, well, this is the federal Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, and
Right.
they ruled in my case that it was unconstitutional.
Okay.
In 2009.
So then the Canadian Human Rights Commission that took the initial complaint, they appealed the decision?
Yeah. Yeah, they appealed the decision.
And so what's the status at right now, Mark?
So we had a hearing in December, and so far the judge hasn't made a ruling yet.
Okay, and you went back to federal court for that?
Yeah, this is in federal court. So the Canadian Human Rights Commission seek judicial review of the decision of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal.
Right.
To overturn it.
Mark, do you know whether Jennifer Lynch has made any comment on this current progress of Brian Storrs' bill?
Well, Lynch is actually out now of the
Yeah.
Canadian Human Rights Commission. She hasn't been around for a while, maybe a year or so.
Oh.
So now the deputy commissioner named David Langtree sort of runs the show over there now. He's the guy that totes back and forth to Winnipeg every week. I mean, talking about this big bucks, high flyer. I mean, he works in Ottawa. He's worked there for years, and he flies home to Winnipeg, and of course sticks the taxpayers with the bill. But so he's running it now. He has made comments that that they wanted to have clarification from the court on this, and they're very. They haven't made much comments on Storrs' bill though.
Okay, so what happens? Obviously, the federal court should come down. Did they give you any idea when their decision would come down?
Yeah, no idea. I mean, I've been in front of the federal court for like 3 years.
Yeah, I know they should be on a first name basis with everybody there.
Well, we only went for 1 or 2 days of hearings, but it's amazing how slow. I have a feeling that the federal court, they sense what's going on politically.
Yes.
There's no point in them coming down with a decision. Why not wait a couple more months, and the law itself will be repealed, so there's no point in the federal court to do anything.
Everything goes moot. Now, tell me what happens to you, though. Okay, I'm interested from 2 points on this, and I'll tell you the 2 questions I'm going to ask you, Mark. Number 1, what motivates or drives a Canadian like yourself, confronted with this kind of perverse injustice, to continue on at enormous cost to yourself, both financially and emotionally? Is going to be my question number 1. And secondly, is there any recourse? I mean, this is basically malicious prosecution. It's misfeasance, malfeasance. I mean, you cannot have the criminal activity of entrapment and all the nonsense that was going on, fraud, inventing personalities, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
What is there anything else that's going on to ensure that you receive your due justice in this case? So first of all, what motivates you?
Well, I mean, when I got hit with the complaint, I just, I've been following the Canadian Human Rights Commission for a long time prior to receiving the complaint. Actually, in the months leading up to the complaint, I started writing substantially about what Richard Warman was doing. Then suddenly a complaint showed up in my mailbox, so
Oh, golly gee, what a coincidence.
It was about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I posted something like 18 articles in a 3-month span, and then suddenly this showed up in my mailbox. So who knows? But we did bring it up at the tribunal. But you know what drives me is freedom. I don't want the Canadian Human Rights Commission, this band of fanatics, to tell me or any other Canadian what we can or can't do, using the power and money of the state to crush little people into the ground. You know, prior to me coming along, 90% of the people who were brought up under Section 13 couldn't even afford a lawyer, couldn't even mount any defense. So, you know, not to say that I had lots of money to go and fight this, but I just simply would not sign a permanent gag order that would, you know, have the state hovering over my shoulder at every keystroke that I hit into my computer to see if they could then hold me criminally before the court. So it was a cease and desist order, really, that stopped it. And, you know, I tried during the hearing to mediate the case constantly, and this was brought up in the decision that, you know, the individual, you know, Warman and the Human Rights Commission, they wouldn't accept any sort of mediation. They simply wanted to punish me and drag me through this system and put a cease and desist order around my neck for life. You know, I'm the only person that's ever been in front of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal to walk away without a cease and desist order. I mean, in 30-some years, I'm the only person to ever win. I mean, what's that tell you?
Yeah. Well, I think I know one other case.
The
circumstances are a little different.
I didn't win before them, Kari. They decided that the complaint was without merit, and they dropped it after
you fought back.
After 2 years and $52,000 worth of expenditure.
What year was that, Ron?
Was it finally concluded?
Yeah.
About 2008 or 9.
Okay,
yeah.
so you
It was about the
probably
same time.
well, what I'm thinking here is
anybody that's been before the tribunal, I'm the only person to ever win in front of the tribunal.
But I'm also thinking, Mark, that when you turned around and began to spank them, you know, as they so deservedly got, then along comes Ron Gray, and he ain't gonna sit down either. I think you're training that there were people who were willing to fight to the bitter end. You know, they couldn't take on any more wrestlers there.
But Mark, when I was in their toils, my lawyer told me that at that point, and I'm talking now about 2004, 2005, that Richard Warman had earned himself over $50,000 from income that was ordered to be paid to him by, you know, the commission had ordered people against whom he'd filed complaints to give him money, and he made a cottage industry out of this. Do you know anything about the actual amount that he got out of his campaign?
Yeah, the actual amount somewhere around 50,000. I mean, these are so. He claimed that he was personally targeted by the people whom he filed Section 13. So retaliation. He claimed retaliation. So that's how he got $50,000 awarded against him. I mean, I don't know if he ever collected any of it, but I know he certainly has been awarded that through the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal process.
Okay, we're fast running out of time here, Mark. And I just want to encourage our audience, visit Marc Lemire's website at stopsection13.com. Mark, where do you go from here? Let's hypothetically say, you know, the Section 13 is repealed. Do you have any legal recourse to offset the injustice and the harm that's been done to you?
That's a good question. You know, I've sort of asked, you know, my lawyers what they think about it. You know, it's a difficult decision because under Section 13, and this is really what makes the law so bad, they can do all of this. So therefore, it's not like under and of course they have no oversight or anything. It's not like the criminal code that stops them from doing this. They seem to be able to do whatever they want.
It almost seems to me to be criminal harassment, you know, for them to go to the extraordinary lengths that they did to set you up, to entrap, to, you know, fraudulently put onto your website, you know, 400 messages of hate, those kinds of things. You know, I would like to see somebody get creative and do something here, because if you could hold, you know, a couple of these people personally accountable that they stepped out of their bounds and then therefore weren't provided with the immunity that typically goes along with being a bureaucrat.
Well, there is immunity in the Act. The Commission cannot be sued. It cannot be sued.
Well, provided that it's operating in good faith.
No.
If they've maliciously prosecuted somebody, I would like to see that there's a little loophole somewhere that you can squeak through and put some names to it.
I'm looking at an op-ed that David Langtree wrote last month in the National Post. The headline says, "We're more relevant than ever," says CHRC Commissioner David Langtree. They don't give up that easily.
Well, they were so happy because Aboriginal groups now can file human rights complaints. So this is a great thing for them. Now they've already received, I think, 300 complaints. So this is great. I mean, they're going to be able to...
More grist for their mill, yeah.
Right. But, speaking about, there is certainly a case to be made that when the Canadian Human Rights Commission was entrapping me, they never told me that they did any of this to me. Like in a criminal case, if the police, try to set you up, I don't know, for selling drugs or something, they have to reveal it to you when the hearing comes around.
Yes.
So that you can cross-examine them and cross-examine the officers. But the Human Rights Commission never told me that they did any of this. It was only by luck that we stumbled, well, not by luck, by research, that we stumbled across what they had done years later. So, all of this could have been, I could have filed for judicial review much earlier if I knew that they did this to me. So, yeah, I think, there's definitely a case. But there's another interesting point, too, that because STORSA, just switching over to what's going to happen to me next, because STORSA puts in a one-year implementation period to repeal Section 13, that means that even when the Senate passes a law, Section 13 is still in effect for another year.
Right.
So now what does happen to me at federal court?
Yeah.
Because now I would be seeking relief from the federal court to strike down Section 13.
Well, and cost. I'm assuming that your lawyer is asking for costs in this matter as well. So there's going to have to be some decisions on that.
Yeah, this is the thing. The federal court won't be able to just not make a decision because it is still in effect. So it will be interesting to see what they do. But basically, whatever they do, it kind of becomes irrelevant because the law itself is gone, right?
Well, I think there's a lot of relevance, and I think it goes to the malicious prosecution in your case. And I have a little bit of case law on that. Then next time I read it, I'm going to have you in my mind as I do so. Marc Lemire, we are out of time. I encourage our audience, get informed on this interesting case. This is a case that is going to be historical. This is a case that's important. This is a case about what Canadians should be doing when they are wronged by the state. StopSection13.com has all the details, the legal arguments. I know you've got a lot of the court documents posted on there. Marc Lemire, on behalf of Canadians, I thank you for your tenacity. I thank you for your vision, and I thank you for your willingness to stand up and fight on behalf of all of us for our right to freely express ourselves in the kind of speech we want to.
Thanks, Mark. Keep up the good fight.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and you guys keep up the good fight, too. I love listening to your show, and can't wait to listen to this week's shows online.
Well, and we will have you back as the events of Marc Lemire continue on. The saga will not go away for a while, people. Thanks again, Mark.
Bye, Mark.
Take care.
There's something that our audience needs to do.
Yes.
And that is to contact your member of parliament. What Brian Storseth has done is a good first step.
But it's not a dunk yet.
But not only the Human Rights Act, but also the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, both need to be defined in a way that establishes them as legislation that protects the citizen from excesses of government, not from each other. We can deal with each other in the regular courts if we have to, but what we need is protection from government excess.
Well, and Ron, you bring up one of my most heartfelt peeves for Canadians. We have become so complacent, so compliant, so conformist, so
nice.
Not even nice, pathetic. We've become pathetic.
Pathetic is good.
I look at your history, people, on the importance of people standing on guard for unwarranted government intrusion. Every time you're intruded, if you can't do it just on the principle, think of it this way. Every time you're intruded, that intrusion is reaching into your wallet and taking more of your money. Okay?
Yeah.
These human rights commissions cost money. Every proceeding done to Marc Lemire costs you and me money. We need to say no more to this. There is a proper role for state. There is a proper role for government overseeing of certain aspects of our lives, dictating to us how nice we have to be. And I know we have an upcoming show that's going to be continuing with this theme, and that's with an app that the BC government now wants to encourage children to report other children on when they perceive themselves to being bullied. I mean, talk about narc-ola. Enough. We need to say we're not going to put up with this nonsense anymore. We're done with it. Let's get government back, minimized into its proper role. It does have a proper role, a very confined one that has boundaries, and stop its constant expansion into areas it has no business being involved in.
Stand up for your rights.
There you go. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us here on RoadKill Radio. Make sure your friends tune in at roadkillradio.com. I'm Kari Simpson.
I'm Ron Gray.
Good night.
Good night.
You've been listening to RoadKill Radio. Join us again next week for another trip down the superhighway of information, fact, and truth.